before we get started, could you just give us a little background on you, what your role is, and a bit of your history, because I think that'll help sort of level set the audience on what you can talk about and what you bring to the table.
Sure, thanks, Jeremy. It's great to see everybody here today. It's funny, when Jeremy introduced himself earlier this morning, he talked about having the best job in the world. And it's funny, after I say the words I'll share with you, often people respond with, "You've got the best job in the world." So when I tell people what I do at Tivity Health, I often say that I'm solving some really societal systemic problems, social isolation and loneliness, particularly amongst older adults, but it actually affects millennials as well. And I'm going to reach into my pocket and pick out the culprit. So this obviously is the culprit for millennials, but it's also the savior for older adults because it keeps them connected. So Tivity Health is kind of a remarkable company. Those of you who don't know, its roots were really in helping older adults get connected through an amazing program called Silver Sneakers. And Silver Sneakers is all about getting out and socializing and working out and remaining healthy and engaged in life. Just in the last couple of months, we made a big acquisition because we wanted to blend what we describe as calories in and calories out. Calories out obviously is fitness, calories in is nutrition. So we bought Nutrisystem, which also includes the South Beach brand. So I've been the chief brand officer for a year. It's almost a year to the day that I joined. A couple of weeks ago, my title was changed to chief experience officer when we blended the companies. And over the weekend, my title was changed back again to chief experience and brand officer because I think we finally recognized that you need a brand advocate. And that's sort of my DNA. My life as a marketer has been all about storytelling, like we talked about this morning. And I started at P&G, was there for a long time, and eventually evolved into healthcare. And the common theme throughout it all is my focus on the consumer. And that's what really matters to me most. And I think in health care, it's really important. When you disassemble the words, health and care, are beautiful words. When you put them together, people go, don't talk to me, health care's ugly. So it's all about that conversation.
So what's been interesting for me in learning about your organization and some of the marketing challenges that you have, it feels like the biggest challenge you had was actually getting Tivity to embrace the idea of marketing and how that can lead to being a brand that matters. So what were some of the obstacles that you faced when you took them on that journey?
So first of all, I was very fortunate, and marketers in the room know how important it is to have an advocate inside the organization because, as I'm sure many of you know, the average life of a CMO in North America is somewhere between 18 and 24 months. And it's hard. You need a CEO, you need a board, you need advocates across the organization in finance and legal who get what you do and really buy in. So I was lucky that I came with a mandate to change. And a very different kind of story than the Nutrisystem story that we'll tell in a bit. Tivity had no traditional offline brand building at all. Everything that we did was actually digitally focused for a couple of years. And it was great that we had proof points that would enable me to then say, coupling both television, potentially radio, and digital content, social, et cetera, can really have an impact in raising our collective business. And the big postscript here is we launched our very first, in 26 years, Silver Sneakers TV campaign called Find Your Place. And it was all about find your friendship, find your fierce, come together with authentic people like you at gyms and other settings where you can engage, but with a very, very strong direct response element. And the first 3 months of that campaign have been mind-blowingly successful. We've seen literally a 3x spike in new email addresses, which is an important metric I can talk about, us collecting over 300,000 a month, which is kind of amazing in January, February, and March, where up till that point, we were averaging about 75,000 a month. And then this whole idea of digital engagement, we realized that, believe it or not, when you're 65 versus 62, there's a huge difference in your willingness to use a smartphone. Yet as people are aging in, we're seeing the adoption at a much more rapid clip, and the content that then we're serving up is significantly more relevant and engaging.
So, do you still have any skeptics within the organization, even though you've had this, this near-term success?
So once again, I think it's great to have advocates on your side. I had a leadership team meeting today, and our CEO was present, all virtual, of course. And he once again reminded everybody on the executive leadership team that this big risk that we took in going out there and telling a story has paid huge dividends. So I don't feel like we do. And maybe there are silent sort of agitators, but for the most part, because again, the leader is forceful and I think really genuine in his support of marketing and big marketing, with a capital M. I think we're in a much better position than organizations that don't have that kind of advocacy.
The other interesting thing that we've talked about is that there, and I would assume that this becomes a bit of a challenge internally as well, is that there's, I think you said the numbers, 11,000 people aging in to the program every single day.
Yeah.
So there's no seasonality to it.
Right.
So the idea of an episodic initiative is probably not necessarily going to be as successful as something that's got to always be on, and you've always got to be nurturing and creating that experience for your audience and also to build your brand. So how are you balancing that?
So what Jeremy's referring to is this phenomenon. I'm the myth buster in the organization. All the rules from the past I've kind of thrown out and said, let's start fresh. And the biggest myth was, well, it's all seasonal. People only go to the gym and work out, at the beginning of the year. And I said, okay, certainly there's some seasonality and truth to that, New Year's resolutions, et cetera. But the big myth bust was every day in America, 11,000 people are turning 65. There's no seasonality. It's every day, all 365 days of the year. So why wouldn't you go out and speak to the eligibles, the 16.5 million people that are being supported by the 68 health plans that are giving them this service, by the way, for free, to adopt silver sneakers and change their life? And that was a big aha moment for us that enabled the organization to think beyond this this blind spot that I think we all had.
And what about the role of, Jeremy was talking about this earlier when he was showing a lot of the great examples that everybody was laughing at, but I'm assuming that, testimonials, consumer input, feedback has got to play a role in the program's success. And one of the other things that you've talked about is getting people enrolled, but then getting them to activate as well is sort of two different hurdles that you face.
Yeah, so it's interesting. One of the things that I've had some angst about is whether to use everyday people like us, just aged a little bit in our campaign, or go after a celebrity who has some stature and notoriety. And I didn't mention, but early in my career, I was the chief marketing officer at the University of Phoenix, and we were kind of addicted at one point to celebrity. And when I talked to consumers, they would lean in and say, I can't relate to an Olympic weightlifter who went to school, or Larry Fitzgerald who plays for the Arizona Cardinals. I'm never going to be, that kind of person. I want someone who I can relate directly to. And that really resonated with me. And the same concept, candidly, is alive and well with our senior population. They want people that they feel look like them. And it's funny, what I've learned, and I've probably met with a couple of thousand people over the age of 65 in the last year, as I go to Silver Sneakers classes all the time, and I just love to listen to their stories. They'll say remarkable things to me. They always start with, how old do you think I am? Which is, a great question. You can't really answer that honestly.
No.
Just go down.
Well,
how
how do you answer that one?
Well, we know they have to be 65, so it's always about 65 or 66.
Yeah.
And they say, no, I'm 83. And then the next thing they do is I had this one lovely lady come up to me one day and she said, I never belonged to a sorority in college, but I finally feel like I belong to one today. Exactly. It was one of those moments. I thought, this is why authenticity matters. When you think about the voice of the consumer, I want that same persona to come shining through. And they have their, they have their foibles, they have their issues. You want to show people who aren't necessarily perfect. I actually got a lot of grief when we produced the commercial because we had nobody in the ad or around the spot or the main actors in the spot using either a walker or a cane. And it's an interesting point, but we do have a lot of people that come to a Silver Sneakers class that way, but then ultimately transform themselves.
That's pretty
we hear
extraordinary.
That story all the time.
That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
So the authenticity piece, and Sam talked about this a little bit before. They're the worlds of brand and performance. They're converging together, and you come from the world of performance with the University of Phoenix, acquisition, ROI, more. Mm-hmm. How do you balance that need of creating a brand, especially one that hasn't marketed before, being authentic, but at the same time, you still have to deliver results at the end of the day?
Right. So first of all, digital marketing has changed, as you all know, so dramatically. I'm not an expert, and that's why iProspect and Jeremy's team is so important to us, because I need a navigator, candidly. And companies that don't recognize that need, they don't automatically do audits every 6 months of themselves, aren't really being, I think, fair to the audience that they serve. So I've experienced that in companies. In fact, when I got to the University of Phoenix, I used to say, you're addicted to digital cocaine. We were literally spending a lot of money, over $150 million on affiliate lead gen a year. We were Google's, actually their largest customer in ad search. And I said, what if we didn't do that? What would happen? And this idea of all leads aren't created equal. A lead coming through SEO is literally 11 times more likely to convert than one coming through an affiliate lead gen apparatus or tool. Those again, back to my Mythbuster philosophy, I think those thoughts really transcend the organization as you think then about how do you balance then the metric that will measure your success. And when I sit with our CFO and finance team, they're always asking about attribution. At the end of the day, everything has to ladder up to an ROI. And I often caution them, because if you're building a brand, you need to take a step back. And this idea of integrated marketing is so critical, to the success of any brand. The fact that, we crawled and walked, then now I think we're running at Silver Sneakers is great. But interestingly, at Nutrisystem, it's sort of the opposite. They're spending a lot of money on television, but haven't really invested a lot digitally. So an opportunity to sort of bring them into a different space. And it's these life experiences that I think have helped me, but then help us think more broadly about attribution in particular, and then how you measure ROI.
Mm-hmm. So we'll open it up. Questions for Arra from the audience. And also you can submit questions into the app, and John will read them out. Yes, we've got one right there.
Hi. We're getting you a microphone, I think.
How do you plan to converge Nutrisystem brand and legacy brand with Tivity Health?
Mm-hmm. So we're working on that as we speak. And I alluded to this idea of calories in and calories out. I think we have to be very careful, because a weight loss company isn't necessarily the solution for our traditional customer. And by the way, we have other product lines that don't serve just seniors, but food insecurity is actually a really big issue with older Americans. So maybe we create, because they've got all the supply chain and they understand, the food pyramid, we potentially provide nutritional solutions that can help provide the number of calories that an older person needs, if in fact we're serving that audience. That's just one idea, but you can imagine how, if we just think a little bit about problems around obesity, particularly amongst younger people, that coupled with an exercise program can be really potent. So we're looking at ways now to bring the two together. Great
Other
question.
questions? Yes.
Hi, Arra. Very interesting to hear you talk about the Find Your Place TV campaign, and how that led to such a lift in email signups. So could you talk a little bit more about how some of that offline work you did around that TV campaign, some of those steps in between? So how did you maybe capture some of the demand that raised to lead to some of those digital conversions?
Yeah. So it was funny. We have an interesting phenomenon. When I first came to the company, we actually weren't doing national marketing. We were very focused on particular markets where we had large health plan relationships. So it was also a big risk to do a national campaign because we weren't quite sure what the reaction would be if we were spending money in the right place. And I said, well, there's efficiency, clearly, if we buy nationally. And I can tell you, we didn't spend a lot of money. We only ran about 4,500 spots over the course of about 10 weeks, but got this overwhelming response. And we measured our response twofold. And it was this elegant way of telling a story, but also really hard-hitting DR, where we said, call this 800 number, and it was specific to each of the 30 cable channels we were on, and or go to getsilversneakers.com. And it was interesting, with an audience that's 65 and older, what we learned is people will type in www.getsilversneakers.com. And we saw this ridiculous lift, particularly coming from folks digitally. Yes, people were calling our experience center, but the surprise, I think, for most of our colleagues inside the organization was how high that lift was through the online experience, which candidly enabled us to quadruple down. We were very nimble. We quickly changed sort of the mix of dollars we spent, and we've probably spent 5x in the first 3 months on digital than we did in the first quarter last year, because we knew that that would be the catalyst coupled with really hyper-targeted TV that we could switch on a dime. So it worked exceptionally well because I think we were very nimble out of the gate. And we started on January 1st, and we were making revisions almost every day for the first 10 days.
Any other questions from?
So we have one from the app here that we'd like to pass over to you, Arra.
Okay.
So obviously as digital marketers, we sometimes forget that we're meeting real people and there's physical locations and there's a physicality to it. And you mentioned that you like to join Silver Sneakers meetings and go actually meet consumers. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the other things that you do there and how you got into that part of it?
Sure. So it's interesting. We actually have Silver Sneakers classes in more locations than there are Starbucks. Think about it. In 16,000 locations right now, a Silver Sneakers class is happening in the US. So I've actually thought a lot about location. And there are some, probably the most common question that we get to our experience center, aside from a lot of people who are just lonely and candidly want to have a conversation, is where is there a class near me? And if you drop a pin, there's typically somewhere around 7 to 10 classes, either at the community center, at the YMCA, at the LA Fitness, you name it, there's a class going on. Interestingly as well, most guys go to work out, most women go to the actual class. I'm not sure I got the second part of your question, but I wanted to at least give the reference of the whole.
Yeah, so the second part was around what are other consumer interaction points or research points you've used to help guide yourself in that path?
So when I came to Tivity, the first team that I brought in was a consumer insights team that focused on research insights and segmentation. We had tons of information about the health plan, but we had very, very little information about the actual consumer. And over the course of just a year, we've grown the number of emails, I mentioned that earlier, from a paltry number to over 3 million in just a year. And what we've enabled ourselves to do is better understand the consumer. So my goal ultimately, and this is a 2019 goal for us all, is to segment the market in such a way that it's not just 1, 2, or 3 personas, but we can truly hyper-target through digital means 3.5 million members. That's our universe today of the 16 million eligibles. So I think largely our opportunity is to fill this void as people just don't know the benefit exists.
So, Arra, in our time that we have left, and I know that there's a few more questions, and he will be here, and we're coming up on a break, so I know you'd entertain any other questions from folks. But given that we had Guy come up earlier and talk about lessons learned, lesson learned from you, whether it's been at Tivity or elsewhere in your career.
So I would encourage all marketers in this room to be bold. The faint of heart often get trampled, I think, in marketing organizations. And it has to be with fact-based sort of logic. But I really believe that those marketers who take calculated risk are the ones that stretch organizations. I remember very early in my career, I was asked once, what I'm doing to help the organization's capacity expand, and I didn't really understand the impact, I think, of the question. But as I've grown in my career, I've recognized how important it is to be a catalyst. And think of yourselves as sort of the ideators, the creators, the thinkers, the folks that are really going to make that wholesale change in organizations. If your voice is powerful, if it's listened to, if you're making, I think, really great fact-based recommendations, the organization will sit up and really take stock in the advice and counsel that you give. Be bold.
Thank you, Arra. Thanks for being on stage
Jeremy.
with us. Nice work. Nice work.